We all know about the good work humanitarian personnel do in places ranging from Sudan to Afghanistan. But what about the psychological trauma suffered by aid workers who see the depravity of man day after day? Lisa McKay is the director of the Training and Educational Services at the Headington Institute, an organization founded to provide psychological and spiritual support for humanitarian aid and disaster relief personnel. She's also the author of a new book called My Hands Came Away Red, a book Publishers Weekly has called one of the Christian fiction's best novels of the year. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
The Headington Institute is a fascinating organization. It provides support for people who are providing support. Tell me about the stories that you encounter. I mean, because there must be lots of stories. Take me in a couple stories that you say, here's an example of people who face real trauma and now are having to debrief on that stuff.
There are a lot of stories. In the caring for the caregivers line of work, I just came back a couple of weeks ago from working in Kenya and Ghana with two groups of aid workers whose primary job is to go to refugee camps in West and East Africa and to take down what they call the persecution histories of these refugees who are applying for refugee status in the US. And so you have a whole bunch of aid workers whose job it is to sit there at a table like we're sitting here, just in a tent, in a camp, and ask them questions and elicit a detailed, what they call persecution history of why did they leave their country of origin, how did they end up in the camp that they're in. Basically, why should they be considered refugees? And so you can imagine the toll that that can take on some of these workers, many of whom go into this work very young, often idealistic, which is not a bad thing, but
they have no idea what they're coming up against.
They sometimes have no idea what they're coming up against. And to hear detailed stories of rape, family devastation, to have mothers who have lost all their children, they don't know whether they're living or dead, to have children who are orphaned, 12-year-olds who have seen their parents die, not to mention the violence and deprivation that can go on in the camps. And to spend all day listening to that story, and to have your job be to take that down, there's an awful lot of vicarious trauma that can go along with that sort of work.
So what do you do with these people then? Do you go out in the field, or do they debrief, and then do you walk them through a counseling process?
It varies. It depends very much on the needs of the individual and the team. Or with this particular team that I've just been working with, I went to headquarters offices in Nairobi and Accra and ran workshops there. So I wasn't in the camps with the teams. We went to a room, we sat down, and we devoted a day to talking about the impact of the work. And the particular topics that I ran workshops on this time were trauma and spirituality, because one of the biggest challenges to humanitarian aid workers tend to be the spiritual challenges.
What do you mean by that?
They're often we talked a little bit about idealism and that sense of going into this work, A, maybe not knowing what you're coming up against, but B, we all have sets of assumptions and beliefs that we carry around with us almost implicitly about the way that the world works.
Or the way it should work.
The way it should work, exactly. The way that, who God is there a God? How do we live in relation to that? What's the meaning of life? And when you come up against trauma, I mean, we see this for those of us who don't go and work in disaster relief camps too, trauma tends to raise very spiritual meaning questions.
And so these people are facing huge spiritual crises as they face this stuff.
Almost no one goes into field work and walks away unchanged on a spiritual level. And that is a particular type of challenge that humanitarian aid workers are often not equipped to deal with. And so we set aside a morning and we talked about, okay, what are some of the normal spiritual challenges that are raised by this work? The very fact that there are spiritual challenges, I think, is that sometimes they haven't thought that through. So working that through and thinking about that and going, okay, well, what helps you? What helps you connect you to that sense of meaning and purpose?
You ever see people that lose their faith as a result of this, that say, I can't be a Christian, I can't be whatever anymore because I've faced evil too head on, and how can God be a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. You have people who go into this line of work very clearly knowing what they believe when they go in, and what they believe when they come out can be very different.
Wow.
And you do get people walking away from their faith. You get the opposite as well, where people say, actually my faith is deeper and richer, and I have a much better sense of connectedness to humanity as a result of this work.
You did a degree in peace studies, a master's degree in that. Here's my question. You've been in Africa, you've been in all sorts of places in the world where there's conflict and war, particularly religious tensions. Let's say, for example, a place like Darfur. How does one like yourself begin to give an answer to the conflict and chaos that's going on there that's not rooted in violence?
Gosh, that, you know, if I had the answer to that question, maybe I would be working for World Vision or UNICEF in Darfur. I think my small contribution to that is to look at the aid workers that are in Darfur, and there's between 12 and 14,000 of them right now.
Wow.
And it is not an easy place to be based.
Because there's all sorts of chaos, and there's rape and violence.
There were 7 aid workers killed in Darfur just in October. The Headington Institute has just conducted a study on behalf of Interaction, a big alliance of NGOs, on staff support conditions in Eastern Chad and Darfur, looking specifically at what are organisations doing to support their staff who are day after day working 12 to 18-hour days, isolated, often without basic amenities like mosquito nets without holes in them.
And don't they need physical protection too?
Yes.
At the end of a gun barrel.
Yeah. And you know, these are dangerous places. I don't think any organisation can take full responsibility for going, we can protect you if you choose to go into this line of work. But there are there's policies and programs that they can put in place that can help, not just with the security, but with the psychological security and the psychological impact of this work.
Right after the break, I want to talk about your work with sex offenders. Are they redeemable or not? More with my guest, Lisa McKay, right after this quick break.